This is Mark Mullinax, and you're listening to Power for the Peaceful, a podcast and class on Taoism.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
Each week I set the episode's tone with a quote read by a listener. Today, Audrey Davis, my artist for this project, will read the quotes beginning with this tone-setting quote.
The Tao Te Ching contains living teachings, discussions to be had, not just ancient riddles preserved in a jar. Seamus Robertson.
Thank you, Audrey. Stay tuned till the end when she asks a question about Tao and social justice. So welcome to this on-ramp, introductory podcast episode, preparing us for a course designed to teach the basics of Taoism, what Tao means, how it applies to us as individuals, and to our collective existences. Today, just an introduction to Tao and Taoism. Next week, verse 1. After that, we'll go verse by verse, 1 week at a time. So who am I, and what business have I to make this podcast? I'm the author, translator of Tao Te Ching, Power for the Peaceful, copyright 2021 by Fortress Press. This podcast will contain and expand on many elements of that book. You may use this translation or another Tao Te Ching translation for our course together. I'm also a professor. For the past 3 decades, I have taught East Asian philosophy at universities in the United States and South Korea, and at a school of Chinese medicine. I will treat this course like I do my own courses, as the most important and fun thing I get to do. However, you decide how to use this podcast's teaching. I give no tests, but it seems that life is always providing us tests. Tests of choice, tests of patience, of endurance, even of justice. This course will help with those tests, I promise. And at the end of each episode, listen for homework, things you can actually integrate into your life to put what you learn into practice.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Today we introduce Taoism, its scripture text called Tao Te Ching, and the context that provided them. In this episode, we shall focus not just on what Tao is, but also how, in these troubled times, we may learn from an ancient but still practiced Chinese spirituality and wisdom for living called Taoism. Tao Te Ching actually means, if translated, the classic text concerning the way of virtue. Tao Te Ching is the most translated spiritual text in the world except for the New Testament. And I believe in my bones that this 2,500-year-old text still speaks. If you're new to Taoism, you've probably heard of Tao already. The Do in Judo, Taekwondo, Aikido, and Hapkido is the same character as Tao. And Tao literally means the way. But Tao can also mean the road, or flow, path, even doctrine. Back in its day, Tao Te Ching was the earliest human philosophical attempt to speak about the theory of everything, how creation began and how all things were, are, and ever shall be, both one and interconnected. Tao Te Ching is a text to help us remember our original connections. When we lose sight of this unitive understanding of Tao and the common origin of all creation, we get into trouble. For in our forgetfulness, we inevitably begin to separate what is meant to be one and undivided. we start seeing strangers, divisions, hierarchies, and other artificial illusions. A stranger is just a part of me I've yet to meet. A division is an artificial line meant to reduce some parts of creation and magnify others. A hierarchy is the fiction that some people deserve to be on top or at the bottom of society. Illusions, every one. The original blueprint of this universe's processes intend unity, non-separation, and a universe without dualisms. As Thomas Merton, the Christian mystic, said,
"The separated self is the basis of every sin. We are already one. We just think of ourselves as separated."
Tao Te Ching was first written in a time like ours, when old structures underpinning society were in decay and decline. New technologies made their appearances. Untested leaders flaunted their ego-driven authority and not much else. False teachings and conspiracy theories proliferated, and restless people sought recompense for perceived centuries-old harms. Life seemed busy and unhappy, and also violent, because it was the era of Chinese history called the Warring States period, when what we think of China today was divided into 7 nations, each bent upon domination or survival. I'll let you draw any comparisons with modern life. The ascending Chinese philosophy of the day was Confucianism. This hierarchical-minded moral philosophy, on its good days, organized the chaotic Chinese society with rules of appropriate behavior according to one's social station in life. On its not-so-good days, however, Confucianists prioritized strict conformity with class-based social norms, norms that prioritized upper classes and males and political leaders and how to behave towards such. Oh, did I mention conformity? The lives of those within Confucianism, especially women, the poor, and the underclasses, were very, very hard, very structured. In a nutshell, Confucianism made human beings on every strata slaves to forces and energies alien to natural human nature. This is because Confucianism is based upon a social hierarchy view of human nature and how human beings are to act in a society where everyone has their tightly controlled role to play. However, the Taoist worldview was based upon nature, or the natural world itself, a view that included all that is human and other than human as well. Into this hierarchically complex and volatile cauldron, Tao Te Ching introduced 4 revolutionary, non-hierarchical ideas: non-being, emptiness, darkness, and silence. And these are Tao's wisdom practices. I'll say a few words about each, but know that we shall speak of these 4 often throughout the life of this podcast. First, non-doing. Non-doing is a literal translation of Tao's essential teaching, Wu Wei, spelled W-U-W-E-I. We'll speak much more about the power of revolutionary non-doing, or Wu Wei. Wu Wei is basically egoless, effortless action, or refraining from ego-directed actions. Practicing Wu Wei, one intentionally does nothing in order to allow natural processes and energies already in play to have their say. It's revolutionary because doing nothing exposes the utter bankruptcy of ego-assisted actions or aggressions. Such are wrong-headed, short-termed, and often end up interrupting the peace of the doer and the receiver of the action. Much more in future episodes, I promise. But for now, let me just give one image of Wu Wei in action. If you sail a boat and need to travel into the wind, just heading directly head-on into the wind and trying to sail the shortest distance between you and your destination, it does not work. Instead, you tack by turning your boat 45 degrees to the left and then 45 degrees to the right of the headwind, and voila, progress happens. Your destination appears by working with, not against, the forceful wind. So Wu Wei is wise action under difficult circumstances. Second, emptiness. How many of us get so full of ourselves that we grind to a halt from the burdens of stress, ownership, and managing the stuff of life we somehow came to feel important? When we empty ourselves of the non-essential, it's like throwing all the junk off a boat or an airplane so it can actually be a useful vehicle. Emptiness is spaciousness and openness, and emptiness is where all our potential lives. Which leads me to darkness, number 3. Think of the darkness of a creative womb, and how in darkness is the only place where we can see the light of candles or get reoriented to our pole stars. Darkness has its primeval place, and it's too bad many Western worldviews equate darkness with evil. Darkness is not a tomb, folks, but a womb. Not a dead space, but the giver of life. And you know how too much light can dazzle and blind and hypnotize. Darkness is a womb of refuge from all our lighted spaces, just as silence is a refuge from noise. Like Wu Wei, darkness is a spiritual practice. The next practice is silence. Silence is so hard for us, but silence is absolute non-cooperation with the seemingly ubiquitous habits of commotion and noise we have been so carefully taught through advertising, socialization, and education, so carefully taught as necessary. Dings and chimes and chirps and radio or TV seem to be our never quietened companions. Before there were words, there was another, and yet so different language, a non-human language with vocabulary, but with a syntax of silence. Silence quietens. Silence is so countercultural to our cultures of noise. When we cultivate silence, we begin to hear things that have always been there, but have been covered up by the ever-present, never-stopping 10,000 noises. What remains after silencing these 10,000 disturbances? Original peace, discoverable after the emptying out of unnecessary noise. Such silence is the Taoist practice, and because it is so countercultural and yet so natural, maintaining one's silence in a culture of noise is a revolutionary act. Pascal, the philosopher, said that our problem is distraction, and the solution is not more distraction, but quietened attention. Such attention is the soul's vocation. The skilled response to noise is not more noise, but more silence. We're taught how to talk, but not so much how to listen. We are urged to push the ego-assisted self forward in the world, but not to diminish that self. At decibel level 0, the illusions of being a self or in a control or on top of things does not last long. In your mind, picture agitated, muddy water going calm just by silence and stillness. In my kitchen, there is this quiet refrigerator. When it kicks on, the noise it makes quickly becomes background noise and seems normal. But when it kicks off, I can hear anew all those sounds that have always been there, but which have been masked, such as the stream out back, birds in nearby trees, and the purring of the cat in my lap. As I'll say often in these future pods, Tao is always there, for it is the blueprint of all creation in the universe. But maybe we have forgotten it, forgotten how to listen, like my refrigerate interferes with my paying attention to quieter sounds.
When life is heavy and hard to take, Go off by yourself. Enter the silence. Lamentations 3:28.
So, non-doing, emptiness, darkness, and silence, these are the practices of Taoism that loosen the tight hold of ego and utterly confound all the false suitors for our attention. And they guide us to fertile, creative spaces where we are more able to witness Tao's creative processes.
When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening?
More than ever in this time, one could not ask for a better wisdom source than Tao for living wisely in these days of climate change, conflict situations, and our daily sound and fury. Following Tao leads to, I think, work for a fair, non-racist, more egalitarian culture. And this is soul work, spirit work, work that returns us to our original peace, original harmony, and original spontaneity. Taoism teaches how everything is originally equitable and connected across time, across species, and across space. So justice and peace are not just our primordial states, but are baked into the original blueprints of the universe. Just take a moment with that thought. Most Western interpreters of Tao leave out this crucial idea of justice and Tao. Therefore, the title of this podcast is intentional: Power for the Peaceful. Simply put, the inequities and injustices you recognize in our world are not baked in, not original, but rather consequences of our unruly desires to promote egos, to exploit, to compete, to become number one and remain great, and most sadly, to think of ourselves as unconnected with others and with this universe that evolved us. Tao is a corrective. Our primordial connection with the makeup of the universe is the power for peace that makes this Taoist text as relevant as today's New York Times.
When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening?
My elementary thesis throughout this podcast is this: our original nature, our natural origin, is Tao. When we forget or lay aside this number one teaching of Tao, we change into someone or something else. Forgetful, exploitative, artificial, destructive, running on ego. Someone desiring the wrong things for the very wrong reasons. And individuals who think that they are standalones, forgetting that they and Tao are of the same stuff and the same energy. Let me speak openly. In Taoism, we in all life and creation are all here with innate belonging. But when we ignore this, we cast these rocks of destruction into situations that ripple out into the cosmos for years. Think karma. This is how racism happens and keeps happening, how global warming arose and remains. But the reverse is also true. One can wisely place stones to build connections, bridges, and beauty, stones that repair, that is, to pair again what has been separated. And these connections also ripple out for years. That's the strategic difference between living a life forgetful of Tao and a life within Tao. Learning about Tao is to learn how to turn rocks of violence into stepping stones of community and communion with all that there is. I call this listening and learning the fluency of creation's voices. More on that next week. So what is Tao? Is it like God? Nah, but you may be interested to know that when Western Christians translated the New Testament of Book of John into Chinese, they used, and still use, Tao in the Gospel of John's first verse, which reads like this. In the beginning was the Word, or Tao, Tao being the translated word for word, and the Word slash Tao was with God, and the Word slash Tao was God. Also, in John chapter 14, verse 6, the Western interpreters used Tao yet again to translate Jesus' words there. I am the Tao. English Bibles use way. I am the Tao slash way, the truth and the life. No one comes to God except through me. Tao and Tao Te Ching is something mysterious and purposefully unexplained by language. Tao is non-personal, non-divine, everywhere, and the agent of creation and creation's maturing. One does not pray to it, but one may listen for it. Tao is the way, the path, the flow, or even the hardly understood process by which the universe operates. Tao is the energy of, the blueprints underlying, the inherent peace of, and the spontaneously natural balance within all creation. Tao is nature. Before we even had a concept of nature, before there was a human knowledge system telling us about our human nature, before there was spoken human language, Tao was already forming and informing our true nature with wonderful fluencies. Learning about Tao today, like you are doing now, is to become more fluent about the nature of the universe and all its often mysterious processes. This is not some otherworldly spirituality in which one's true home is in some afterlife or heaven, but rather a creation-grounded spirituality teaching us how to live in this body, in this time, and this space, in the now, the here, and the this. Now, here, this is our true home.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Let me speak more about how we are interconnected, or what Thich Nhat Hanh called interbeing. We live in a web of interlocking energies with ancient origins, and we are here to share and to participate, but not own or manipulate them. There's this flow to everything, and since we come from this flow, it is in our original nature to stay with the flow. As we are part of creation, Tao shows us how all things were, are, and shall ever be both one and interconnected. So our breath is the same breath in plants. Our energy is the same energy that forms rocks. The 60% water within us comprises the same ancient molecules that feed monsoons, baptizes kids, flows over your favorite waterfall, and created the Grand Canyon, and even what you drank earlier today. The same processes that brought life and consciousness to this planet brings other life and other consciousnesses to other places in the universe. And because of our ancient connections with the energies of the universe, we do well to remember how we are not ourselves until we realize how connected and interlocked we are with the rest of all creation. This course in Tao seeks to give voice to these intermingling connections at our most basic and most exalted levels. So relax. We're already one. We're already connected. We don't just appear on this planet willy-nilly. We're not aliens. But we emerge uniquely from evolutionary processes billions of years old, kind of like oranges can only emerge from an orange tree. So if we are metaphorical oranges, then we dare not neglect our relationship to our roots, trunk, branches, leaves, and even the climate that produced us.
Ecology, wrote E.F. Schumacher in his Small is Beautiful, holds that an environmental setting developed over millions of years must be considered to have some merit. Anything so complicated as a planet inhabited by over 1.5 million species of plants and animals, all of them living together in a more or less balanced equilibrium in which they continuously use and reuse the same molecules of air and soil, cannot be improved by aimless and uniformed tinkering.
Tao is the very energy of creation itself. The same patterns and principles that characterize and govern the Amazon forest govern humans too. The blueprint for all creation has but one source, Tao. There's not one blueprint for oceans, another one for land animals, and then another one for human beings. The energy of a plant is fundamentally no different from that of a human being. Since all existence is shared, it's we, not me, us, not I. But in our hubris have we forgotten and forged this synthetic, human-centered bias. We have no idea, none, what blueprints we violate in our aspirations to control, to own, and to manage.
Verse 29 of Tao Te Ching. Rhythm. Because Tao shapes nature, all things under heaven run by a sublime spiritual rhythm. Can you improve it? It is doubtful. Meddling only blocks Tao's flow. Control is another name for lose.
There is revolutionary energy here. Might we listen? Why should we? Let me try to say this yet one more way. Those who live into this text and other Taoist texts, I think, grasp and perhaps live into the utter limits of human achievement. That is, when we are connected to Tao, we are most human, which is what we are meant to be. Here's a liberating thought. Because harmony is our origin and our destiny, why not practice harmony now? So this podcast comes to you from one who is convinced of Tao's utter reality and claims upon our times. As traditional religion's influences decline due to their civil wars within and uncivil wars without, can we hear anew a 2,500-year-old voice of bold wisdom, both timely and timeless? Living as I have and teaching this text for 4 decades, I have found Tao ever my touchstone and spiritual magnetic north. Tao has been my return to clarity in frenetic or uncertain times. Tao is my reminder to be patient, not competitive, and to let go and not work my ego, Tetris-like, into every endeavor. Tao Te Ching speaks in any setting, from the boardroom to the caucus hall, and from the classroom to the streets. It's not just found in nature, for Tao's nature is also discoverable in a prison cell. Now I admit the reputation of Tao Te Ching text is not that great. Many feel Tao Te Ching is a nearly indecipherable text for mystics to read and consider within the privacy of their monastic cells. That Tao is not the best of guides for public affairs, cultural critiques, business ventures, or even scientific endeavors. I feel this artificial split too. And in this podcast, I shall bridge these gaps. This scripture's real value comes when we perceive Tao still at work in, influencing, and still having a wise word for the everyday and the everything.
The basic tenet of Taoist thought, reads the Oxford Companion to Philosophy, 2nd edition, is that the operation of the human world should ideally be continuous with that of the natural order, and that one should restore that continuity by freeing the self from restrictive influence of social norms, moral precepts, and worldly goals.
Many Aboriginal cultures understand nature as sacred. A wild, huge, untamed, interlocking handshake of energies, powers, and life, in which a moral spirit inhabits all. To be most human is simple. Live in these energies, and do not exploit them for personal gain. For many millennia, and still in places around the world, people believe they live in a sacred place, a spirit-filled time, a time and place where rocks speak, mountains hear, trees bear witness, and water connects all. Nature, for many of these Aboriginal cultures, is alive, and it speaks for those who listen. Tao's power for peace is the very birthright of all things, from the bird at your bird feeder to endangered species, to endangered people, and anything or anyone else you may imagine. Who today sees all nature as alive, as speaking, listening, and vibrant? May I offer you some homework? Go out into what you consider nature. Doesn't matter if it's for an hour or for a day. Leave behind things that chirp, ring, or have screens. Go with an attitude of openness, of listening, of quieting your inner voices of critique, desire, or impatience. And when quiet, you will hear many voices, from the sounds of birds or animals, to the wind whispering in the trees, to the sign language of clouds or mountain ranges in the distance. What is nature saying? Begin your fluency training in these sounds and sights, and then bring home these teachings back with you as you continue living. And now to Audrey's question.
In a time of social injustice, how does Tao compel us to be rebellious or to misfit?
Audrey, I love this question. Thank you so much. The story of Tao began long before we arrived here. It is a story or song of original peace and justice. Since injustice has arrived into the world, and then only in the human realm, it is the human species, hasn't it, that has forgotten its original connections with Tao. Today, with social injustice so pervasive, how can Tao help? Well, first, I doubt Tao compels, as you might say in your question. Tao is non-personal. However, we can and should be ever aware of Tao's original song of justice and peace as we go through our days. We can cooperate with Tao, and that's where your word misfit becomes most relevant. Because, Audrey, if we are to rehear Tao's message for our day, we have to do the countercultural work of falling back in love with all the original peace and justice that we want to preserve. The heart of being a misfit today means to stop listening to the songs of hate, injustice, war, and oppression, and listen for our origins and connections in Tao. Stop listening to our culture's siren calls of unease and aggression, and begin to listen to the Tao story, the Tao song in which no oppression, injustice, or separation occurs. But be careful, Audrey, and count the cost. Our society is one that does not reward people who break its expectations of how we are to fit in. It wants us to go along and get along, and not question its unexamined addictions to aggression and ego-assisted ventures. I'll close with a Henry David Thoreau quote. If one does not keep pace with one's companions, perhaps it is because one hears a different drummer. Let that person step to the music which they hear, however measured or far away. So, Audrey, hearing that different drummer today is the practice of the misfit. We become so accustomed to culture, and we need our prophets, our misfits who hear and march to alternative beats and rhythms. By practicing non-doing, emptiness, darkness, and silence, we become that necessary misfit who models how to live a normal life, not by society's rules, but by Tao's guidance. This podcast is an original work, designed, written, and produced by me. Podcast artwork and additional voicing for this first episode by Audrey Davis. If you'd like to be a reader in future episodes, just contact me. The Put Your Roots Down song is graciously provided by Molly Hartwell. The copyright for quotations from Tao Te Ching is held by Fortress Press. May your days begin in peace and become laboratories for radical hope.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening.